Father, we praise you and we thank you for this new day. We ask for your blessing for the speaker this morning and to all of us who are participating and listening. And we may understand and we may follow these lines correctly, understand history and the meaning of it for our generation. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen.
Yesterday we began looking at these lines of history from Daniel 7, 8, 11 and 12, and we began in Daniel 11. We started looking at Rome, and we see that Rome begins in verse 14, and we got to verse 30 into verse 31. So as we started doing that, you've noticed that when we deal with pagan Rome, in fact when we deal with Rome, we're going to have a repeat and large through the chapter. So I've just erased the line for Daniel 7 so that we can I'm just going to redraw this in a simple fashion just at the top before we move on so that we can understand what's going on. So the first line of history we had was here. We began in verse 14. But if you recall, in verse 14, the king of the north is still Greece. And all that's introduced here is the term, the robbers of thy people, and they establish the vision, his own vision. So it talks about the robbers of thy people and that they're going to establish themselves. But we've already picked up from verse 16 that it's in 168 that we begin to see pagan Rome come into history. And we went all the way down to verse 22. So that's the first line of history that we looked at. Just to make sure I've got everything that I wanted to say about that. Yeah, and in verse...
What was the event of 201?
201, there's a war that's going on between Greece and Syria. Have joined forces, the king of the north. They're starting to threaten the Egyptians, and the Egyptians seek help from this small nation who are really insignificant, and this is where Rome begins to exalt itself.
Okay.
I'm just checking one thing, if I can quickly see it. Yeah, in verse 22 it talks about the crucifixion. So it goes right up to the death of Christ in 31 AD. So this is how pagan Rome begins to rise in history and how he eventually is going to persecute Christ. So that's one line that we've got through this story here.
So can you repeat what happened exactly in 168?
168 was the Battle of Pydna. So this is where pagan Rome officially begins to take over from Greece. In Daniel chapter 8, verse 9, we have 3 dates marked. We have 64, 63, and 31, all BC dates. And this is the east, the glorious land, and the south. So this is Daniel 8, verse 9. And Daniel 8, verse 9 is just talking about the culmination or the end of, well, it's talking about the plucking up of these 3 powers for pagan Rome. It's talking about the very end of Greece. So officially, we should really be marking Greece comes to its end in 31 BC, because that's when Egypt, which is the king of the south, which is the the last portion of Greece that's going to be overtaken by pagan Rome. So if I were just to draw it, let me just draw it here. So if we're going to go from Greece to pagan Rome, we'd mark 168 to 31. These are BC dates. So it really begins here, and then by the time you've got to 31, it's fully complete. Because by 31, you've got these 3 horns that are plucked up. Not horns, but these 3 nations who are subjugated. So there's this overlap that's going on. And then when you go from pagan Rome to papal Rome, you're going to see this same overlap occurring. And depending on where we would start that, you know, we could start that at 321, but we'd probably go for 330, and it's going to be all complete by 538, and this would be the papacy. So you get these overlaps, or this progressive fall of one nation as the other one is rising. So that's what's being identified in this first line, how pagan Rome is going to take over from Greece, and it marks all of those events. So most of it's all done in verse 16. In verse 16 we've got 168, we've got 64, 63, and then when you get to verses 25 to 28, we're picking up from verse 31. Actually, no, it's verse 24. Verse 24, when he rules on top of pagan Rome, on top of the city of Rome, even for a time. And so we're marking 31 BC as that event there. So we've got those 3 dates from verses 16 and verses 24. But if you think from verse 16, yeah, 16 to 22 is one history. So then the second history that we looked at was, let's run the second history. This begins in 158, and this is verse 23. So we've got verse 23, 158. Then we've got verse 24, which is going to take us to 330 AD, and all the bits and pieces in between that. So by the time you get to verse 29, you're there. So 23 to 29 is going to take you through another history, and you can see we've gone back to 158. So this is teaching us another thread of history. And I think in this history, I can just check through my notes. Yeah, this history here isn't dealing with any persecution of God's people. So this one here tells you how he rises up. This is pagan Rome. And it talks about the persecution of God's people. You can see that back here in AD 31, where he exalts himself against Christ. But this line of truth, you don't see persecution in here. You see the league with the Jews, and what else do we see? Verse 25 to 28. Yeah, all you can see here basically is how he has a league with the Jews. Then we're going to see the whole story here in 31 BC about the intrigue with Cleopatra. So that's the other key event that's going on here. This is verses 25 to 28. And 24 just covers this whole history in one fell swoop. This was 24. And this date was 31 BC. So this is going to tell you how he rises and falls. And he first rises here when he interacts with God's people. So that's the other history that we got. And then we got into verse 30. And we kind of got into verse 31. But when we get to verse 31, it's going to take us right back to 330 AD. So verse 30 is going to take us to this history from 330 up to 534. This is verse 30, which is the verse that we're looking at. And then verse 31 right up to verse 39 is going to take us back from 31 is going to cover all of this history here, which we haven't got. We didn't read verse 31 yet. It's going to take us all the way back here. That's verse 31, and then it's going to carry on right up to 1798. And this is 32 to 39 into verse 40.
So the second line...
This one?
No.
This one?
Yeah. So would you classify that as primarily as leagues? You could say league with Israel and a league with Egypt?
Yeah, I wanted to go. I want to go. You know, one day I found one day is not enough to go through your notes and prepare for a class, and to look at these things in detail. So I'm trying to come up with a good theme for all of these 4 lines. This one, he rises, he persecutes God's people. This one, it begins with the league, and then by the time you get to, I don't know if people can think on their feet as we're going through this. This is by the time he gets to AD 330, this is where pagan Rome is going to come. It's going to come to its end, and now the papacy is going to begin to rise. I haven't got a good title for that, unfortunately. So this one here, verse 30, this is the rise of the papacy.
Compromise or something?
Pergamos, yeah. And this one, you're going to see how he's going to go through the same history. He's going to rise up, and now he's going to persecute God's people. So when we have God's people being persecuted here, it's specifically talking about Christ. And here, it's the persecution of God's people. Now, I haven't thought about this well enough, but you could go into these histories and break down how you can see the host being trampled down and the sanctuary. So these are the 4 histories that are all running through from pagan to the beginning of pagan Rome, right down to verse 40, which is the time of the end. And it's broken down into these 4 segments. So, in many ways, the history that we're living in now is this history here, which is the same history as verse 31. These 2 histories overlap. But verse 31, let's read verse 31 before we go back into verse 30. An arm shall stand on his part, and they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength. They shall take away the daily sacrifice, and they shall place the abomination that maketh desolate. So we've discussed it a number of times, this verse, and we've got our 3 dates. I've given you the start date, the pollution of the sanctuary of strength, 330 AD. This is Constantine moves the capital from the city of Rome to Constantinople. Do we remember why it's called the Byzantine Empire, by the way?
Because the city
Because the city that was there originally is called Byzantium. So it's Byzantium, he changes it to Constantinople, and years later we're going to identify that as the Byzantine Empire. So we've got 330, pollution of the sanctuary of strength, then taking away the daily would be here, 508. And then the last bit, they shall place the abomination that maketh desolate, 538. And we've made a distinction between the transgression of desolation and the abomination of desolation. What was the connection between those two thoughts that we've... Right? If you, I don't say
The image of the beast and the mark of the beast.
the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, yeah?
Combination of church and state and the Sunday.
Okay. So, just to recap then, what's happening in 508? So we're marking 508 as the taking away of the daily. I'm just going to rub this off and all of this. What's happening in 508? What events do we mark as 508? So we've got the Visigoths. So the Visigoths
Taking away the daily in 508.
sorry?
Taking away the daily in 508.
Yeah, I'm looking for the history. What history is that talking about?
King Arthur.
So we've got 507 to 508. So we're picking up 508. And Brother Marco, could you just repeat what that history was? Because they don't beat the Visigoths that you were telling us, if I remember.
Say it again?
They don't. Clovis doesn't beat the Visigoths in that
Because the
history.
Ostrogoths.
So if you just give us the history of 508 again.
Okay. There's a war between the Ostrogoths and the Visigoths.
Okay.
And Clovis, the king of the Franks... No, sorry. There's a war between the Franks and the Ostrogoths.
Yes.
And Clovis defeats the Ostrogoths and he kills the king in the war. Then the Visigoths, which are through family bounds connected to the Ostrogoths, come in help of the Ostrogoths to defend them, and they win against Clovis and the Franks. So they win.
Okay, so the Visigoths have won the battle.
They win the battle.
Okay.
And instead of expanding their conquering or whatever, they enter in a peace treaty with Clovis.
So that's the history about the Visigoths, because often we teach it that they beat the Visigoths.
And by making peace,
Yeah.
they cease to attack the Roman armies any longer from that point on. And also, but sometimes they point out that in 508, Clovis receives a title from the remainings of the Roman Empire. He's like, I don't remember the title, Prince of...
Oh, he receives it in 508, not 496?
Yeah.
The first son of the
508
papacy?
he receives the title.
Okay,
Let me
so
see if I can find it.
is it the first son of the
No.
church? Oh, a different title.
No, he received a legitimate title
Okay,
from the Greek Empire or something.
so we've got the Visigoths. So the second one, we just said, was King Arthur.
How does the Visigoths answer to the daily at all, then, if they won? What's the point of even bringing them in if they weren't defeated as pagan?
So I think a number of things are happening, which is why I wanted to just quickly review that. Clovis does a number of things for the papacy. He has this struggle with, which we mark the Visigoths, this where I think Uriah Smith says by intrigue and by three things, he basically, they take down the daily. One of the things that we're marking is the Visigoths. Also the Burgundians are taken down by this time. There's kind of like a series of events that happen that Clovis is going to shut down basically paganism in the West, and he talks about the garrisons in, I think it's in France, the Burgundians, and then it comes to a culmination in this struggle with the Visigoths. So that's one point of history. Then the other one was King Arthur. King Arthur is identified in 508 as the last of the seven horns that come over and side with the papacy. There's no good there's no historical evidence for that, and we discussed in class that lots of people aren't going to accept or buy into that. And there's a third one which we haven't discussed. This is all happening in the West. In the East, sorry, yes.
You want me to say it more specifically what I just said again, because I know I have my...
Yeah, if it's short, please go ahead. Yeah,
Sure.
yeah.
So one thing, the Emperor of Eastern Rome, Anastasius of Byzantine, grants Clovis the title of consul of the Roman Empire, because in 507 he had attacked the Visigoths and killed their king Alaric II. This is, I think I had those mixed up.
Okay.
507 he had attacked the Visigoths and killed their king Alaric II in the Battle of Vouillé. This war was backed by the argument of bringing an end to Alaric's anti-Catholic rule. The Ostrogoth, Theodoric the Great, father-in-law of Alaric, sent his Count Ibba to enter Gaul over the northern Alps to attack the Franks. Clovis and his allies received the most decided and bloody defeat. The adversaries agreed to make peace. He unaccountably made peace with him, and the resistance of the Arian powers was at end.
Okay,
This is
what's that
basically
source?
the different sources I'm using. I
Okay,
compiled
it's his
it.
notes. He's not reading. He's just got his own compiled notes. So in 508, they do actually subjugate the Visigoths. Then it's the Ostrogoths
Yeah.
that come and help them and do that. So we've got King Arthur, Visigoths. Did you want to say something?
No, I'm just saying that I still, when you just read it, it's the Aryan powers, is what he just said. That's the resistance that they're, I'm not seeing the connection to paganism. I don't understand stuff.
Part of this struggle that we have is, are we going to call paganism or the daily Arianism? And you don't want to.
No, I call them Christian. The other nations are pagan.
Which ones?
Arianism, from my understanding, is actually a type of Christian religion.
Yeah.
So I don't think you can call it paganism. You have to call it, because it existed. Arianism was the three horns that got plucked up. It resisted until 538. So then paganism, if we call Arianism paganism, then it wasn't taken away in 508. So you have
What do you want to mark in 508 then?
anything but that.
You got some choices?
My point is that I have struggled with
I think we understand the point. What choice we're gonna?
I don't
Okay.
have any option, but I'm just saying that to mark an Aryan power's defeat as pagan doesn't seem to do justice to the prophetic narrative, because those Aryan powers still resist until 538. So therefore, by our own logic, we're inconsistent. We would have to say that it's still paganism resisted until 538.
Okay, you're introducing a. We're gonna bury that because we don't like that what you're saying there. And the third thing that's happening is in Constantinople, the papacy is gaining control, gaining ground, and here they almost have civil war that goes on, and the emperor. I don't know if I can pronounce this properly. Don't know if I can spell it properly. Anastasius. So that's the emperor, Anastasius. He's the emperor in Constantinople, Eastern Rome. And he's, I think, let me just double check. I think he's the emperor that comes just before, oh no, so there's him, then Justin, then Justinius. Justinian. So he's two emperors back, and in 508, basically he's going to lose his throne essentially, because the Catholics are trying to assert their authority, and this happens in 508. So in 508, the Roman emperor is basically taken off of his throne, and he sits there at the behest of the Catholics. This is in Constantinople. So we've got three things happening. Maybe that's a bit nicer, that paganism is taken away. This emperor is...
The Goths aren't Aryan. They're pagan. I gotta look.
You got to look. You look into it for us.
That Anastasius is the guy who gives Clovis the title of consul.
Yes, and that's what we
Yeah.
just read there. And he did he do that in 508?
Yes?
Yeah. So I suspect he's probably forced into doing that because the papacy is beginning to exert itself. It's doing it on. We've got three things that are going on. We've got the warfare with the Visigoths, King Arthur, which we can't prove historically, and Anathesis, who's the emperor in Constantinople. His subjects are going to rise up against him, who are now Catholic, and they're going to essentially force him to do their will. And one of the things he does is he makes Clovis, what's it called, the consul of Rome. So that's 508. So you're going to see if the Visigoth. So if the Visigoths are pagan, then we're still okay. We're still on track.
Yeah, I'm just saying on the
Oh,
chart.
sorry, yeah.
On the chart, you have three horns off to the right here.
Yeah.
And none of those are the Visigoths. So those are the three Arian powers that I'm familiar with that resist against Catholicism. They get plucked up by 538. The Visigoths aren't a part of that. So therefore, we can still associate and relate them to paganism.
Okay.
But historically, I don't know how to prove one way or the other what they are.
Okay.
But
Oh, so
I was going to ask,
okay.
when were the Vandals, no, not the Vandals, the Ostrogoths blocked off?
When the Ostrogoths plucked up, what date?
They were the first ones, I think.
538.
So the first ones are the Heruli,
Okay.
then the Vandals, then the Ostrogoths. So where are the Vandals? Because we've got the Vandals here. 533, 534. By 534, the Vandals are plucked up. So we've got that date. And then the Heruli are first.
When was that for?
193. 553 is what it was.
5.
For the Ostrogoths.
You got 553.
From Uriah Smith.
Yeah. So let's just go back to the Heruli. So the Heruli, you've got 483, I think it is, to 493. And the king is Odysseus? However, okay. Oh, how'd you... OD.
Odoaker. That's how you say it?
They say Odovaca.
Odiarca, Odysseus. Okay. So he's reigning through, I think it's his 10-year period. He's got control of the city of Rome. And I think it's in 490. The emperor from Constantinople is going to send his, I think it's his, is this Zeno? I think it might be Zeno. Yeah, Emperor Zeno is going to send his general to sort the Heruli out. So they go there, and he leaves, and Odysseus, the Herulites, leaves the city of Rome, and he goes to another city called Ravenna, I think it is, something like that. And 3 years later, he's going to die. So this is the story of the Heruli, how they basically get kicked out of the city of Rome.
Where can I find this Anastasius and this...
Wikipedia works really good, all on the CD-ROM.
It's on Wikipedia.
Yeah.
Google. There's this thing called Google. We'll teach you about it.
So that's Heruli, we got that. The Vandals we're still ploughing through, and the last one is the Ostrogoths. So the Ostrogoths, in fact, what you see is each one of the, what's unique about, I think it might be unique, about all of these three horns that are plucked up. What do they all do? They fight against Rome, but what's happening here in this history between 490 and 493? But where are they living?
In Rome.
They're living in the city of Rome, so they've taken over Rome. And we mentioned yesterday, in what date did we put it as? It's after, was it 455?
when the
Yeah.
Vandals sacked Rome?
455, they sacked Rome, or ransacked Rome. This is the Vandals. And now you get to 538, and the Ostrogoths are doing the same. So in 538, the Ostrogoths, in some shape or form, are in control of the city of Rome, and now they're going to be evicted from that, or they're going to be dealt with. So all of them are attacking the city of Rome. So it's the Heruli, Vandals, and Ostrogoths allies, 538.
Those, with the exception of the Huns, are the trumpets.
Yes, yes.
So it's interesting that the ones who punished Rome the most were the ones who were uprooted also.
Yeah, and so there's a
With
nice,
the exception of the Huns.
there's a nice sort of thread. I kind of see it as revenge. All of this is just revenge on these people that came and attacked them.
Yeah.
And the Huns, they just run out of energy, basically. They just self-implode. When Attila the Hun dies, their nation just fizzles out and they come to naught. Which is kind of what happens with the Second Woe. Second Woe was sent on a mission and they failed their mission. That's how I understand the Second Woe. The Second Woe was to kill the papacy and they fail. They don't do their job.
What happened again with King Arthur? He just subdued or something?
So yeah, he switches over to
Okay.
to Catholicism. Yeah, it's a one-liner and it's not. People won't say it's sound history. So I had another look at this history here that we're talking about, 330 to 534, and as I was thinking about it yesterday, what I forgot was some history that we all should be familiar with. So we've got these three people here, and I've spelt that wrong. Let me just spell that correctly. It's monotheism, monotheism. There are these three groups that we're dealing with: the Arians, the monotheists, and the Catholics. And at the back of all of this, what we need to remember is the work of James Arrabito. So we've all heard of James Arrabito.
Oh, yeah.
And I forgot about this when we were discussing all of this, that in this history here, even before this, he digs up so much evidence that everybody here is keeping Sabbath. Almost everybody, besides Rome and the Alexandrians in Egypt and Rome. Most of the Christians there are keeping Sabbath. So he provides good evidence, and there's other evidence that the Aryan tribes or the Vandals are keeping Sabbath. The monotheists, who are basically the church in Constantinople and part of I don't know what we're going to call this, Near Asia or the Middle East here, they're keeping Sabbath. And so at the back of all of this, there's this struggle about the Sabbath that's going on.
What's
So
his name again?
James Arrabito.
Modern day, right?
Oh,
Did
sorry?
you write it on the board? If you know how to spell that. Just the last name. Right?
Yeah.
He does that documentary maybe on Sunday. Is this the same guy?
I don't think that's quite right, but it's something like that. You'll be able to find him. There's some videos he's got on YouTube. He does a lot of research on how the Sabbath was just buried in history. And the thing that was throwing me was when you go through both when you go through the pioneers' works on all of this history, and when you go through secular history, the Sabbath doesn't come up. So there's an undercurrent in all of this story in verse 30. We're looking at verse 30. So read verse 30 again. For the ships of Chittim shall come against him, therefore he shall be grieved and return, and have indignation against the holy covenant, so shall he do. He shall even return and have intelligence with them that forsake the holy covenant. So when I read Uriah Smith or any of the other pioneers, they give all of this history that's going on here. how they're selecting the papacy above all of the other churches, but they don't introduce this concept that there's a struggle about the Sabbath that's going on right in this history. And I don't think James Arabito ties, I haven't seen any work that he does where he ties his work to this history and joins them together, but he's very clear that let me try and give a bit of background on this. So you've got the Catholics who are in Rome in the West, then you've got these monotheists who are in Constantinople, and you've got the Arians or the Vandals who are in North Africa and most of the Mediterranean. They've got control of all this area that's in blue. Now, you can split what's happening in the Eastern churches into two groups. There's what they call the Eastern Orthodox Church, which we call Greek Orthodox today, and you've got the, I think they call it the, let me check if they've got the name correct.
Arabito isn't spelled there. It's A-R-R.
Thank you.
A-B-I-T-O.
A-double-R.
A-B-I-T-O.
A-B.
I-T-O.
Arabito. James
Okay.
Arabito. He was an artist, by the way. Yeah, by profession. So there's these three groups. There's the Greek Orthodox Church, and there's what's called the Oriental Orthodox Church. And the Oriental Orthodox Church, these are the countries that they've kind of got hold of. The Armenians, Azerbaijan, Ethiopia, and Eritrea. So as soon as you think of, you want to write those down?
Yeah.
So we've done 508.
Is it the monotheisticism?
Yes. So they're in three. They're kind of like in three groups really. So I'll try and explain it in a second. Let me write these. Armenia. A-R-M-E-N-I-A. Ethiopia. Eritrea. And I think I had one more. We could put Azerbaijan. Which one have I spelt wrong?
Ethiopia.
E-T-H-E. Just an E there, yeah? No. E-T-H-I-O.
Yeah.
P-I-A.
And they are all Greek Orthodox?
So these are termed the Oriental Orthodox Church, not the Greek Orthodox. These are Oriental. And when I write these down, if you've ever looked at any of his work or you know anything about ancient Sabbath keeping, have people heard of things like the silk trade route?
Is it Orthodox Church or Oriental Church?
It's called the Oriental Orthodox Church. There's another one called the Greek Orthodox Church. They kind of have this split. So there's this three-way struggle between Catholicism, the Greek Orthodox Church, and the Oriental Orthodox Church. But if you know anything about the silk trade route that goes through China, if you know anything about the Armenian, Ethiopian, and especially these are well documented, these churches, you know that they've got a strong tradition of Sabbath keeping. So at the back of all of this struggle, it really is a struggle about the Sabbath. So what I'm marking here is in verse 30, even though secular history doesn't teach it, and I don't think the pioneers teach it this way, that there's a struggle at the back of all of this about Sabbath. These are all Sabbath-keeping churches. So that's one thing about these churches. And the Vandals or the Arians, there's evidence to show that they're Sabbath keepers as well, which is, I guess, part of the issue that Brother Michael's having, that they're not even pagan. Yeah.
They're Sabbath keepers.
Yeah. I came across this. I think it's by an Adventist. I haven't checked who the author of this is.
Walter Fight.
Oh, Walter Weiss says it.
Yeah.
Okay, Walter Weiss says it. So he's probably getting it from the similar sources that I'm getting it from. What else did I want to say about that thing? So the Arians, there's evidence to show that they're Sabbath keepers. There's evidence to show that these Oriental Orthodox churches are also Sabbath keepers, and to a degree, the Greek Orthodox are also Sabbath keepers. So there's this struggle that's going on right at the back of this history here, where verse 30, where a lot of the information in verse 30 is going on, where Justinian's going to select who's going to be the corrector of heretics. I think without us getting good historical sources for this is a struggle about the Sabbath.
So were the people, the Russian, the Orthodox in Russia?
So the Russians today, I think they've got about.
Oh no, during the communism.
Oh yeah, all that time, but they're Greek Orthodox basically.
Greek Orthodox.
Yeah.
And were they Sabbath keepers?
I'm not sure if they're Sabbath keepers now, but
No, back then.
way back then.
Even brought communism into Russia.
Oh, in what kind of time period are you thinking?
Before communism was brought.
Oh, so like in the 18th, 17th, 18th, 19th century. I'm not sure if the inroads of the papacy had been made by then, and I don't know enough about Russian history, but I know about Ethiopian history. You can go right back into the 10th, 11th, 12th
Right,
century.
about that. I was just wondering about Russia, because Walter White prisoner thought that basically they sent the Jesuits in a couple of times and they were wiped out by the Greek Orthodox, and they were trying to take over and they couldn't.
Okay.
And that's when he brought the idea that they brought communism in order to basically wipe out
Oh, I see.
the Orthodox belief,
Yeah.
because they wouldn't accept Catholicism.
I've not seen his research. There may be some validity in that. Any source for what she's saying?
I know a documentary.
Walter White.
A documentary.
There's a documentary that was made, I think, by Arlido's family or somebody related to him, because he's in the credits somewhere. But that addresses all of these countries that you mentioned, but also Russia and them keeping Sabbath.
Okay. So what I'm suggesting is this. Verse 30 is primarily dealing with a Sabbath issue.
Mm-hmm.
We know in 321, we've got 321 marked here. So we didn't mark 321, so because we didn't have a verse for 321. In 321, Constantine's going to make a Sunday law, and what's the gist of his Sunday law?
Feast celebration day.
Okay, so he's going to start all the rites and traditions and all the ceremonies, etc., that have been established for the Sabbath, he's now transferring over to Sunday. So there's a transfer from Sabbath to Sunday, but he's not going to persecute you if you keep Sabbath. You can keep Sabbath just as much as you want to. So the thing about 321 Sunday law is that he's now promoting Sunday as a sacred day, but you don't get persecuted for keeping Sabbath, which is in marked difference to 538, because what's going to happen in 538? You get the same, it's exactly the same law, but now it's just being tightened up, and now you actually get persecuted for keeping Sabbath. So that's the main difference between 321 and 538. It's the issue of Sabbath. 538, yeah, 538, the Sunday law in 538 and 321. And what's happening in the midst of all of this, when you see this history between the Catholics, the Arians, and the Orthodox churches, there's this struggle for the Sabbath, how it's going to get repressed and squashed by the rising up of the papacy. But you don't see this in secular history. All you see in secular history, which is what was confusing me, I think we were talking about it over lunch, is that there's another difference between these three groups. So Catholics are I'll put Trinitarians. These are Catholics. And if I put the Arians, and I'm just going to put Orthodox, and I'm going to combine these together, and they've got an issue about this. They've got an issue about this. They're not in agreement with it. So they've got varying disagreements. One of them is that they believe that, actually it's all to do with the nature of Christ, really. So let me change this. There's a struggle between all of these groups, and it's all to do with the nature of Christ. And this is what secular history teaches, that this warfare that's going on between these three groups are to do with the belief system of who and what Christ is. Now we know between the Vandals and pagan Rome, or the Byzantine Empire, this struggle, there's an economic struggle that's going on. That we understand that, and a military struggle for power and supremacy, but there's also a religious war that's going on. So there's a religious war between the Catholics and the Arian Vandals, and the primary driver for this, if you go through secular history, is to do with the nature of Christ. They don't mention the Sabbath. But James Arabito and other Adventist sources are going to tell you that the main issue is the Sabbath. And that's what was throwing me yesterday. So when we talk about these monotheists, and they're having a struggle with Catholics, and they really don't have anything to do with God's people at first sight, I think they do. I think when it talks about those who forsake the Holy Covenant is to do with the Sabbath. And what's obscuring all of this is this issue about the nature of Christ. Someone had a hand up, Brother Jonathan.
Yeah, it's answered. I just wanted to know what the Arians and the Orthodox believed in the nature of Christ.
They have slightly different views.
But it doesn't matter.
Yeah. I've really struggled to try and get this thing succinctly so that we can just I can just verbalise it in a couple of sentences. There's so many threads coming in all at once, which for me yesterday, and even now to a degree, is still obscuring the truth of what's going on and the issues that are surrounding this. Sister Tanya.
Those 4 groups, the Armenia, Ethiopia, Eritrea, and Azerbaijan, do they belong into the Catholics, Arians, or monotheists? Or they are a group of its own?
They're these monotheists.
Okay, thank you.
So what I'm going to do now is I just want to read some things that it's a combination of what I've read and just my own notes. So this is, we read of, I can't pronounce his name again, Anastasius, who was the emperor in Constantinople. After him comes Justin, then after him comes Justinian. So this is just some notes I've got. The work of Justin and Justinian in elevating the papacy to power brought on a new era introduced in the Middle Ages. So that's why we had this shift to the name of the Byzantine Empire as we get into 538 and onward. There's this name shift because now we're going into a new era. During their reigns, the religious and political tendencies of the empire now took so different a direction as to positively constitute the dawn of a new era. Thus at last Rome had triumphed after fighting so long. The reign of Justinian is more remarkable as a portion of the history of mankind than as a chapter in the annals of the Roman Empire or the Greek nation. The changes of centuries passed in rapid succession before the eyes of one generation. So I don't think we spend enough time or appreciate enough what Justinian is doing. He's turning the world upside down, and in one generation, just in his reign, what we think is just this transition from Greece to pagan Rome, from pagan Rome to papal Rome, which is just this simple thing, is actually a really profound change that's going on. And the person who's doing all of this is Justinian. So Constantine and Justinian, I think I said the other day that they're the same person because they're both in this time period of these 2 Sunday laws, and they're the driving force that are going to bring the papacy to reign the earth, to reign in the world supremely. With the conquest of Rome by Belisarius, the history of the ancient city may be considered as terminating, and with his defence against Vitiges, which was the king of the Goths, from 536 to 538. Sorry, 536 to 540. So the king of the Goths in 538, his name is Vitiges. Sometimes we don't. I think I got his name mixed up maybe once or twice. 538. Belisarius, who's the general of Justinian, is going to take the Goths out of Italy, and they're going to depose him, and they're going to place on the throne at Rome the new pope. And the taking away of the Goths commences the history of the Middle Ages. Even the popes, the way the Pope and the Catholic Church is structured, all of that changes in 538. So there's three changes. There's two changes. Justinian is going to totally change the nature and the relationship between the state and the church, and if without him, the papacy could not have risen. That's one thing that's happening. The nature of the popes change, the way they interact, the way they organise themselves, that changes. All that's happening in 538. And the other thing that in 538 is happening is Justinian is publishing his edicts, and he compels everybody to join the Catholic Church. He actually pronounces the law. He says this, I'll read it, my notes. In 538, Justinian published edicts compelling all to join the Catholic Church within 3 months or leave the empire, and he confiscated all their goods. He enriched himself with their properties and with the property of all non-Catholics, and he gave all their churches to the Catholics. So I've marked 3 things that are happening in 538. The papacy changes the way they organise the popes. Justinian forces everybody to become Catholic. He writes the law, and just this whole overarching process where he's going to send his general to depose the Goths, place the papacy as the king in the city of Rome. Just preceding this, I just want to say, just reiterate some of the points we brought up yesterday. So we spoke about Corpus Juris Civilis, which was this law, this new law that, or the new way that Rome was going to understand how law works. So I just want to read some bits from here. Thus we see that the Roman Catholicism was made the state religion in 538. So I've just explained that they're the state religion in 538. And all other religions were forbidden. What gave special significance to these edicts of Justinian was the fact that he had already, in 533, declared the Bishop of Rome to be the head of the universal church, and had subjected all the priests, even of the East, under the See of Rome. This fact he wrote to Pope John II. We mentioned Pope John II yesterday, March 15th, 533, in a letter. So he writes a letter to Pope John II.
Where are you reading this from?
This is a combination of my notes, but if you go, let me tell you the coding of it. It's on the CD-ROM. I've adapted some of these things because the language is a bit long, and let me try and give you the... It's in the CD-ROM, and it's under recent authors, and the book is called the book is called Facts of Faith. Facts of Faith, and it's written by Christian Edwardson. Christian Edwardson, Facts of Faith. And I say recent author, he was in the 19th century, he died in 1944. And he covers some of this history, he covers a lot of history, but some of his language is a bit simpler to read than some of the pioneer language.
Pages?
Sorry?
Pages?
What pages am I looking at? I'm looking at I'm looking around page in the 50s. Around page 50 in his book. Yes.
There's also The Rise and Decline of the Roman Empire by Edward Gibbon.
By Edward Gibbon, yes.
Volume 7 is about this history. It's much more extent.
Yeah, what
So
people
it
do
might
is,
also be easy to read.
all of these people just clip out from Edward Gibbons. Most of the people are going to take snippets from his work. But Edward Gibbons is most of the original source material for this history. So in 533, he's going to write a letter to the Pope. And in this letter, he writes a letter to the Pope in 533. So he writes a letter in 533. In 534, the Pope is going to write a letter back to him. And both of those letters are all contained in this work of law called Corpus Juris Civilis. So that letter isn't just any old letter. It actually goes into law. It becomes law. So I just want to read a little bit about this, if I can find it. So in 534, the Pope is going to call Justinian his most illustrious and merciful son. So Justinian now is the son of the papacy. And as I said, both of these letters, the one that Justinian wrote to the Pope and the Pope wrote back to him, are incorporated in this document. You can get a copy of it on the internet. I haven't read it. And this is some of the statements that are written in that book, in this, I think it's a 4-volume set. We order that the most holy Pope of ancient Rome shall hold the first rank of all pontiffs, but that the most blessed Archbishop of Constantinople or New Rome shall occupy the second place after the Holy Apostolic See of ancient Rome, which shall take precedence over all other sees. So in this book here, he's saying clearly in 533, where this is written, that the Pope in Rome is the head over the bishop in Constantinople. So that's the point that we want to make, that he becomes the corrector of heretics. He writes this letter to the Pope in March. A couple of weeks later, he writes to the bishop in Constantinople. So he's written 2 letters. In this other letter, he says this. On March 25th, 533, Justinian, writing to Epiphanes, Patriarch of Constantinople, stated that he had written the above letter to the Pope, repeats his decision that all affairs touching the Church shall be referred to the Pope, head of all bishops, and the true and effective corrector of heretics. So when we use that phrase, the corrector of heretics, it's actually Justinian's own words. It's nothing that we've made up. And the epistle which was addressed to the Pope, or this letter, and another to the Patriarch of Constantinople were inserted in the volume of the civil law that we've just listed here, this civil law, and thus the sentiments contained in them obtained the sanction of the supreme legislative authority of the empire. Thus we see that the way had been prepared in 533 in anticipation of the 3 final acts which were to occur in 538, when the Arian powers were destroyed, Catholicism was made the state religion, the papacy placed under the protection of the state, which gave rise to the long struggle between the church and the states as to which should be supreme. So all of that is a bit complicated, I know.
Can you just repeat those last 3 things?
Those last 3 things, the Arian powers are destroyed. These are the Goths in 538. They're destroyed in 538 when Belisarius is sent to Italy to take him off the throne. Then Catholicism is made the state religion. So there's a law that Justinian writes and says in 538, you've got 3 months to either convert to Catholicism or you're going to be banished and we're going to take all your property. And all the churches were handed over to the Catholics. And then the third one, the papacy is placed under the protection of the state. It's now a state religion. So they're the 3 things that are happening in 538. So what we've marked in all of this, which is verse 30, is that 533 is the beginning and 538 is the end of a process. Question?
Yeah. What's the difference between the second and the third point?
So the second point was Catholicism is made the state religion,
Yeah.
and the papacy placed under the protection of the state. You're right. It sounds like the same to me. I was just reading from his book.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Where were these territories that were these, no, that's, were them territories under the jurisdiction
These
of
ones?
Rome?
No. Oh, Rome as in the Roman Empire?
I'm assuming the Byzantine Empire
Yes.
would have to be Catholic as well.
Yes.
So were these under that empire? I know I
Okay.
know Ethiopia was so
By this time, we're in 533, 538. We're familiar with 606. Is it 627 or 629? 27. 627, the Battle of Nineveh. Yeah. So you're familiar with the warfare between Rome and Persia. That warfare starts way back here in this history. So slowly but surely, the Byzantine Empire is losing control of all of everything that it owns. So it doesn't have full control of any of these states, which is why they have this level of autonomy. And the Persians and the Mohammedans were not. They didn't have a struggle against the Christian Sabbath keepers. So you can see that in Revelation 9. You know, it talks about don't harm those that have the seed of God. So, you know, we talk about Islam bringing all of this, you know, this new light and new insight into Europe. Part after they understood mathematics and the arts and language. All of that apparently was understood or kept by the Sabbath-keeping Christians of these nations, and these are the ones that taught Islam everything that it knew, basically. But that history's been buried. So everybody thinks Islam taught the West everything that we knew about, you know, our numbering system, about our culture, but apparently this is all New Testament church that introduced all of that to Islam, and then all that information got buried, and everybody gives all this praise and glory to Islam, that they had all of this great light.
The thing that, like you said, what happened is, and there's a documentary about this, and it's from the Islamic perspective, so it's a little bit skewed, but they got the knowledge from the places that they conquered.
Yeah.
All these places that you mentioned, and these guys had the knowledge from the time of Christ.
Yeah, because these are Sabbath-keeping Christians. So we've marked 533 to 538 as this transition or this control from these two dates. The other one we mark is 508 to 538.
Sorry, say that again.
Yeah, I didn't say anything really. I just fudged my words. That's why I did say it again, because I didn't say anything. What we mark in 508, we mark the dailies taken away in 508, whatever we understand that to mean. So there's this setting up that's going on from 508 to 538. This is Daniel 12:11, the setting up from in this 30-year period. But there's another setting up that we don't think about that often, and that setting up is from 533 to 538. And that setting up is to do with the bringing down of the Vandals, which is not this history. So maybe if we just work through it together, we'll be able to get something. So 533, let me do it this way. 533 to 538. What's happening here? The Vandals are being taken down. What else are we reading? That the papacy is what is becoming the state religion. There's now law that's being introduced, which I don't know, which enshrines the papal position. By the way, most countries, at least most of Europe, I don't know about the United States, they take a lot of their law from this 4-volume set. So we've got the Vandals are being brought down, the papacy becomes a state religion, and the law enshrining the papal position, and at the bottom of all of this is the Sabbath. The Sabbath is under attack.
When people say Roman law, is this the law that they're referring to?
Yes. So what he's going to do, he's going to collect all of the law that precedes him, law that he's made up himself, and combine all of this. So so the question Brother Michael asked was about Roman law. That we talk about at 9/11 we switch from English law to Roman law, and you're considered guilty unless you can prove yourself to be innocent. I'm not sure how that would be worded in this 4-volume document, but this is where everything that we understand about European Roman law is all going to take its roots from. The interaction between the church and the state. So I wouldn't be surprised if that concept is built into this document.
Yeah, and so, because in opposition to this is English law, and that comes outside of this.
Yeah.
This is barbarians coming together and judging amongst themselves. That's where it developed in the UK.
Yeah.
So, anyways.
The Vandals and the Ostrogoths are being taken away.
We should put the Vandals. All I was thinking is the time period from here to here, what's happening.
Yeah.
By the time you get to here, it's the Ostrogoths.
Okay, so the Vandals they're still kind of in line with the Ostrogoths. Like, they overlap, is what you're saying.
If we're going to do a timeline, this is the Vandals, 33 to 34, and this is 38, and this is the Ostrogoths.
Okay.
So they're the beginning, they're the end of this time period.
Okay.
All I was trying to think is, we have all of these repeat and enlargements going on, and sometimes we get lost about what the purpose of them is. So I'm just trying to work through my mind what's actually happening here. What is this story teaching us? What is Daniel 11 verse 30 teaching us? Now, it covers all the history that occurs before. It's covering all of this history, how the Vandals rise and they have this economic struggle. But the focus seems to be in the last portion of that history. And the things that we can identify is that the Vandals are being dealt with, the papacy is being chosen as a state religion, its dogmas are being now enshrined in law, and the Sabbath is under attack. But in 508 to 538, what's happening here? Because that's a slightly different story, isn't it? They're both preparations. That's why I want to try and see if we can distinguish between the two, so we have some kind of clarity.
Can you say the political powers?
Yeah, that was my thought. I'm thinking this is. There's these political powers that are coming down. Anything more than that? We've got specific histories. We've got. I don't know, I'm struggling to go past that one. I used to think 508, there was so much information about 508. But now I think, there's so much information about 533. 533 seems, in many ways, more significant than 508. And we never talk about 533, hardly ever. 508 always seems to be the focus of our attention.
Well, does the ending of the 1335 and the 1290 help us understand 508 and 5? Because the end is from the beginning. So what's taking place at the end then?
I can't hear what you're saying.
So she's talking about 508, you've got the 1290 and the 1335. Both of those dates begin in 508, and these dates are going to take you to 1798 and 1843. So Sister Tiffany's comment was that these dates here, the events that surround them, are going to teach you something about the beginning, because the beginning teaches you something about the end, or the other way around.
Isn't it the abomination of desolation being set up at 508 too?
So 508, we have the image of the beast, church and state. I don't know, maybe we have to think a bit more about that one. I don't know what more to say on that history besides what we're saying is, my focus has been verse 30, and I'm not 100% clear how to make a prophetic application of all of this, that's the intricacies of this that's going on. But what we do know is that what distinguishes this history from this one is the Sabbath. I don't think 508 to 538, this setting up is dealing with the Sabbath issue, but this one is definitely talking about the Sabbath issue. And I think as Brother Marco's has mentioned, all of this is to do with religion. And I think would we say all of this is to do with the political intrigue? I don't think religion is directly involved in 508. Anyway, everybody's silent, so we're all obviously thinking about it.
I'm just trying to think about our application now.
Does anybody want to venture on our application now?
If we could just work from what you've got there.
I know Elder Jeff's made applications before on this history. I don't know if people
Trumpet power.
are familiar with it.
Papacy being an impediment to the state power.
So there's a lot more to that than I can grapple with and explain in a simple way. So I'm not going to attempt to do that.
One thing that kind of actually jumps outside of that history book is within it, I guess. 321 to 538. Did you receive that email?
320. So 321 and 538.
Heather Del Rosal sent an email quoting from somewhere, some historian or somebody, I can't remember, maybe it's just James White quoting a historian, about 321 and 538. And you just stated exactly what the email says. I don't know if you had time to read it.
No, I've not seen it.
Okay, so it's just a paragraph, and it says that because she was saying, is it possible that we can understand 321 to be the midnight cry and 538 to be the Sunday law? Because, like you just said, it's the same law, and 321 in that history, you weren't persecuted, but there were laws instituted for keeping Sunday holy. So that's exactly how we understand the midnight cry.
Mm-hmm.
So anyways, if there was an application present truth-wise for that, it seems like 321 might point us more directly to the midnight cry than the Sunday law.
The only reason I didn't mention that was I thought that was established, but maybe I don't know that it has been. Maybe in my mind I've thought about it so much that maybe I thought it's common knowledge, but maybe it isn't. So
we usually apply 321 to the Sunday law and 538, but I'm looking at it as like maybe that's a progressive history, and maybe this in-between history is showing us dynamics. Maybe there's got to be repeating and largest and stuff, but there's dynamics that exist between the midnight cry and the Sunday law. Because 321 seems like abundantly clear to me at the point of the midnight cry.
So let me just recap. I was under maybe a misapprehension. I thought some of this, the point that Brother Michael's bringing up is this: the relationship between 321, Constantine, and 538, Justinian. There's a relationship between the two. And a couple of days ago I said they're the same person at one level. You can get those histories and bring them together. And because I haven't been able to keep up with all the classes in the past, Brother Michael said that there's been an understanding that 321 and 538 both pointed to the Sunday law time period. Yeah, Sunday law, as we understand, the United States Sunday law. But as we've been going through this now, and maybe it's the point that I just mentioned a while ago, that here you're not persecuted for keeping Sabbath, but you have to keep Sunday, and all the rites and rituals that connected with Sabbath gets transferred onto Sunday. And then in 538, what happens here is that everything's the same except now that you're persecuted for keeping Sabbath, that there's a connection between these two events. And there's an email from Sister Heather Del Rosa quoting probably James White.
James White.
It is James White.
From the Present Truth.
And he's quoting an historian. Do you have it there?
I have it here.
Okay, if I read it?
Yeah, go ahead.
It'll go on the mic
actually
better.
A few paragraphs.
Okay. So just from, what's in quotation marks? From the time?
Yep, from the time.
Okay. So I'm not exactly sure what I'm reading. From the time... From the time of the apostles to Constantine, the Sabbath was generally observed, while the first day was regarded as a festival of no greater importance or authority than Good Friday or Holy Thursday. In 321, Constantine published his edicts enjoining the observance of the first day in all cities and towns while the country people were allowed to work, and at that time and after most of the churches observed the Sabbath. Therefore, Constantine did not effect the change. So that's what I think I've been saying, that here, 321, you have a Sunday law, but it's focused on the cities. That's one issue. The country folk aren't dealt with really, and there's no persecution if you keep Sabbath. Dr. Chambers says, by Constantine's law made in 321, it was decreed that for the future, the Sunday should be kept a day of rest in all cities and towns, but he allowed the country people to follow their work. In 538, the Council of Orleans prohibited this country labour. Socrates in AD 440 says, there are various customs concerning assembling, for through all the churches throughout the world celebrate the sacred mysteries of the Sabbath on the Sabbath day, yet the Alexandrians and the Romans from an ancient tradition refused to do this. What Socrates is mentioning, actually a number of people, I think I actually had this one in my notes. I'm going to read that again. It says Socrates in AD 440. So 440 is where? 440 is around here. 440.
Right there.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah, sorry, yeah, we're in this time period here. And this is this time period of Genseric. Genseric is the Vandal king, yeah? So around this time period, this is Socrates says this, there are various customs concerning assembling, for through all the churches throughout the world celebrate the sacred mysteries on the Sabbath day. So he's agreeing with what we already said, that in this time period here, all the churches are keeping Sabbath. They're all keeping Sabbath, and it says, yet the Alexandrians and the Romans from an ancient tradition refused to do so. He's basically saying this, the Romans, the church in Rome and the church in Alexandria, through some tradition of their own, don't keep Sabbath, but everybody else does.
Yeah. Also, when it says the mysteries, what it means is their ordinances or their rites. Foot washing or communion. These are the mysteries.
Yeah.
They termed it with pagan terminology, but that's what it means.
These are just
The rites.
they're using the language that the world is using. They might use about us. We're some kind of strange cult, and we have all these weird vegetarian rules or whatever. That's how they would view us from the outside. We have all these mysteries, and that's how they're viewing these Christians who are. But he's marking the fact that they're keeping Sabbath.
Even the Christians themselves, they by that time had determined to call their own rites mysteries. They called them because they wanted to appeal to the pagans.
I'm just going to read one more paragraph, and then, if that's okay. Or is it connected to what I've just said?
Yeah, I was just going to tell you
Go
where you're
ahead.
reading from.
Oh, okay, yeah, please do.
You're reading the Bible Sabbath, the history of the Sabbath from the time of Constantine to the Reformation, and it's page 2829.
And who's the author of that?
James White.
Okay, is it a book or?
No, this is published in the Present Truth magazine.
Oh, is that just an
But
article?
It's on the Pioneer City Round.
Yeah.
We popped that in here too.
Yeah,
It's an article or a book that you.
I can
How
check.
could you find it?
It's in the Pioneers.
As we're looking for that, in 538, at the very beginning of the 42 months, 1260 years, that the papal beast was to blaspheme against God and make war with the saints and overcome them, the Council of Orleans prohibited the country labour on Sunday, which Constantine by his laws permitted. From this time, the observance of the first day was gradually but forcibly urged upon the people, and the Sabbath dismissed wherever they owned allegiance to the Pope as head of the Church, and in England and Scotland as late as the 13th century. Then it was decreed that it should be holy time from Sunday noon until Monday. Oh, this is taken from the Present Truth. Okay, you can find the article.
538 was the progression. Is that what it said?
So it's saying in 538 they're going to continue to tighten up that law.
So that was
So here you're seeing that you're not persecuted for keeping Sabbath, and here you're going to see that you begin to be persecuted for keeping Sabbath. So there's those two laws. And so Brother Michael is saying we can line that up. I'll put it over here. 9/11, midnight cry, Sunday law. This is 321, and this is 538. 538 is the obvious one. We'd all mark that as well. But it's the 321 that we'd see that there's the progression that's going on here. And I think in agreement with that, when we say 321 and 330, that they're the same thing. They're a cause and effect relationship. Yeah? So Constantine's going to make a Sunday law, and then he realizes he's going to get punished for that. He doesn't really realize it. Yeah. He realizes he's going to get punished for Sunday law, and he runs away, leaving his house vacant for someone else to take over, little knowing that person who takes it over little realizes what persecution he's going to be faced with when the barbarian tribes come and punish him for making that Sunday law. So that's the story of the first four trumpets. So that's the relationship between these two, and that brings us into verse 30. Now, skipping all of this history, verse 30, in this history that comes right to the end of it, is dealing with all of this issue here about the Sabbath, which is what Brother Coleth is saying. How do you make an end-time application of this? Because if we're going to look from 533 to 538, which is, I'm saying there's this setting up of the papacy, which is similar to this setting up of the papacy here, but it's dealing with different dynamics. Even though we've got 533 here, 533, if we were to put 321, if I put 321 here, the history between here and here is really all contained in verse 30. So at one level, I think we might have some legitimacy about putting 533 here as well. So all I'm trying to suggest is that this history from pre-Sunday law is being typified by what's going on here. And if we can work out all the intricacies and the dynamics of that, we can get some understanding of what's about to happen or even what's going on. Sister Bronwyn.
So are we marking 9/11 at 533 with the restraint of Islam because the Vandals are completely wiped out? And then 508 as the midnight cry, and 538 as the Sunday law, the 30 years being the binding off. Is that what you're considering? Or?
So you said 533, 508.
Yeah.
That's what you said, yeah?
Yeah, that's what I said.
So you've marked
What's wrong
533,
with
correct?
Yeah, what's wrong with that?
Oh, I'm just working through it, yeah. So 533, the Vandals are being restrained.
Yeah.
And the Vandals are a symbol of?
Islam.
The Vandals are a symbol of Islam. So...
Why are the Vandals?
Thank you. I want someone to ask. Why are the Vandals a symbol? Oh, before we move, you had your hand up. Sorry.
I was just going to say, I was thinking of 1888 Midnight Cry, Sunday Law. But that's just another theory. We can leave that and just explore this one. That's just kind of worms.
Okay. Well, we won't leave the... So...
Okay, I see what you're saying.
I don't.
You're saying what? Who's saying?
Yeah, you're not going to use them as a symbol.
Oh, I'm not saying. No, I'm saying that let's walk through this. How we go about doing that. So
You can't. You're starting with a false premise, so it wouldn't work.
What's your false premise?
well, let's work through it anyway,
Okay.
because I don't understand why something is false or not.
I think we should start 321 at 9/11, because isn't that when the cause and effect. Now the trumpet powers are gonna come.
But there's actually a decree for Sunday at the midnight cry. That's why we're understanding 321 associated with the midnight cry. Because there's actually a Sunday law decree.
Yep, there is.
Let me just go with this one first, or the Vandals. So I don't know this, but some people here do. We've got 7 trumpets. We've got 4 trumpets and 3 trumpets. These come against pagan Rome, and these come against papal Rome. So on one level, these trumpets are the same thing. So through some intrigue that I don't understand, through some intrigue, we're going to get this and put it underneath here. And what I mean by that is, we're going to say that these 4 trumpets here, 1, 2, 3, 4, and the 3 woes are at one level the same thing. So these first 4 trumpets can be typified or brought into our history. So you're going to give us some clarity on that, hopefully.
Are the trumpets and woes the same thing?
Yeah. Well, okay. We'll call it the 5th, 6th, and 7th trumpet then.
But when you identify a prophetic application,
Yes.
isn't it simpler just to leave it at the level of, it's a trumpet power that comes against God's people? When it brings it to 533, I would think it needs to go to the level of identifying, saying that the Vandals are a type of Islam, but simply there's a restraint of the trumpet power.
But the Vandals, there's
I like
a very
that.
interesting connection if you make the
They're super
Vandals
connected.
Islam. If you associate them correctly.
So on the simple level, a trumpet power comes against Rome for what purpose?
Because he did wrong.
Because he's done wrong, because he's making a Sunday law. And if there's a restraint of the Vandals in 533, I don't know if we should put 533 straight 534, then we see that there's a restraint of Islam or a trumpet power at 9/11. So that's the logic for doing that. So
What you
Brother Tyler.
what you have right now is what we already teach. Disregarding Vandals and just at the generic level, we already apply the 5th, 6th, and 7th from 1989 to the close of probation.
Right.
And on a whole nother level, based upon the number 4, we already apply the 4 trumpets from 1989 to the Sunday law. So where you are right now isn't even, it's already in the public record. Stepping further to what the Vandals are associated with or symbolize, that is newer ground. That's new ground, but what you're saying right now is in the public record.
Okay, so the 5th, 6th, and 7th trumpet can be identified from 9/11 into the Sunday law. That's
From
1989. Sorry, what did I? Yeah, 1980. That's what I meant to say. That's understood. Revelation 9.
That's Revelation 9 and Luke 1.
When you bring Luke 1 into that story, whether or not we understand that, there's a level of understanding for that. And then these first 4 trumpets, we can see them being typified in our own history from 1989 to the Sunday law as well. So we can see that. So there's some kind of understanding on that level. But now we're saying if the Vandals are restraining 533, that maybe they're typifying what's the restraining of Islam at 9/11. But there's a connection between the Vandals and Islam that is something that's newer to most, that's new to us.
Okay. And that connection, just real quickly, is that the decree that goes forth against God's people actually isn't against God's people at first. It's against Islam. And the decree that goes forth to give the Pope's power in this history that we're discussing, it was a decree actually against the Arians. It was against another religious power. So they were like, we need to take out the Arians. That's what's going to happen here. They're saying, we're going to need to take out Islam. But the decrees are actually against God's people, all fundamentalists. It's going to be a decree against fundamentalism. Right?
Is that how you would describe it?
Yeah.
Yeah?
That's the easiest one.
That's probably the easiest.
Okay.
That's the quickest and easiest translation.
So part of the complexity in all of that is if you start taking symbols can have more than one meaning, because if we're going to take the Vandals as these Sabbath-keeping Christians, it doesn't work. So at its simplest level, there's a trumpet power that's restrained, and the Vandals are being restrained in 33, 34, and they would be typifying Islam. So there's a reason or a logic to say that we can identify them in a different way to Islam. Maybe we need to explore that a little bit better. So maybe we're marking 533 here, and we haven't had a chance to work through the rest of this. Run out of time. Please, first tell us what the question is, because I've forgotten what the question is.
James White and what you were reading from that quotation from Sister Heather.
Okay.
It's actually a book. It's called the Bible Sabbath, but it's from articles and excerpts that are careful selection from the publication of the Seventh-day Baptist, and also from the publication of the American Sabbath Tract Society, especially their history of the Sabbath.
Thank you.
Also, you can find it in the President's
Yeah. Most of the things are pretty easy to find on the CD-ROM. Let's close with prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you for your loving kindness and your goodness towards us. Father, may each of us, through your Holy Spirit, through the words that we choose to use in our conversations with one another, Lord, may we find an interest and have a desire to study your word, to study prophetic history. And as we get these complicated lines of thoughts and ideas from many different authors, may we be able to condense these, even just for ourselves, into a picture that helps bring clarity to what's going on in the world today. Father, we know that's the purpose of all of these studies, and also to bring us closer to you. Father, may we honour you and glorify you in all that we do, in all that we say today. Please bless us, protect us and shield us, Father, from harm and danger. We thank you, Lord, for the things that you have taught us this morning. We pray these things in the name of Jesus. Amen.